game was that?
This is kind of fun, seeing all the people on here.
That's right.
Oh, big class, this is awesome. All right, prayer request this morning.
A young girl named Abby just wants me to give her first name, and she's battling addiction. And my aunt, who's 92, had to go to the hospital last night. They think it's a little mini stroke. We don't know.
Where's she at?
Who, Abby?
Your
My
aunt.
aunt. She's here. She's at Lourdes. My sister and cousin took her last night.
Yes, ma'am, we will pray for them. Anybody else?
Praise that Lydia is home, eating. Elizabeth's got a fever today, but she's so we're happy.
We'll be traveling this week. Ask for traveling mercies for us as we go down to Atlanta to celebrate Thanksgiving with Jessica's family. I know there's other folks traveling. Anybody else? Mike, will you open us?
Oh, Holy God, we give you thanks and just lift you up right now and praise you for the marvelous way that you work within our lives, within our families, within our community, and within this church. And you've heard the concerns of our hearts and those who are hurting, those that need your healing touch. We ask that you would not only affect the patient, but those surrounding, that they too can see the glory of your work of hand. We lift up those who will be traveling this coming week, the busyness of this time, that still you will be in the forefront of our minds and gather us all back safely together in this place. We're thankful for James and for his prep, and we're thankful that the Holy Spirit will lead us this day. And we come with questions in our hearts that only you could make a path of understanding. We ask all this in Jesus' name.
Amen. So, Leviticus chapter 19. We've been studying these lessons on obedience, and we're going to focus today on obedience to God's command on how we treat each other. Do we need to hear that? I think we do from time to time. We need to be reminded of how we're to treat each other. So, all of these commandments God has given to Moses go back and reference, it's easy to tie them back to the Ten Commandments. Everything that God's giving Moses now is fleshing out the details on how to live out that covenant relationship with Him and with each other. The first 5 of the Ten Commandments focus on the relationship between man and God. The last 5 focus on the relationship between man and fellow man and each other. So we're looking at those, kind of how these reflect those last 5 of the Ten Commandments in these specific commands on how to deal with each other. In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1, God gives Moses a command to him specifically, and to remind the children of Israel the reason behind this. So I'm going to go to chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. I want you to hear what God's telling Moses. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say unto them, Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. God's telling Moses, tell the people of Israel, you people are going to be set apart, holy, for my name's sake, because I, God, am holy. You're going to reflect my holiness in your everyday life. You're going to reflect my set apartness to the rest of the world. You're going to be an example to them on how it's supposed to be, on how life is supposed to be lived, on how you're supposed to interact with me and each other. You're going to be this light to the nations. Why? Because I am holy. You're going to be set apart too. Reminds me of us. It's our call. As Christians, that's our call too. To be set apart, a royal priesthood, a peculiar people. 1 Peter tells us that we're supposed to be set apart for that same reason. To be different from the rest of the world so the rest of the world can be drawn to God. Not to us, but to God. That's what God's telling the children of Israel. Be different so that it draws people away from the garbage that they're doing to the holiness that I am. The set apartness that I am. How do we do that, God? How do we show ourselves as being set apart and be different? Well, God's very gracious. He gives us these examples. And we're going to skip down. There's all kinds of stuff in chapter 19. I hate that we skip it all. We may look at it some more tonight. But we skip down to verse 9. There's good stuff between verses 2 and verse 9. But today, for the purpose of our lesson, we're going to go down to how we're supposed to be compassionate first. So we're going to skip down to verse 9, and God's going to tell us how to be compassionate to those that are less fortunate. Do we know that that's something that's on God's heart, to take care of the poor? Absolutely. God, even through Jesus, said that He's come to preach to the poor, deliverance to the captives. Jesus is this isn't just Old Testament, this is New Testament too, truth about how we're supposed to handle those less fortunate among us. It's a command. It's a indictment on those of us that aren't doing that. So let's see what God tells His people in verses 9 through 10. Let's go 9 through 10 to begin with. Someone read those two verses for me, please.
When you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape from thy of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God.
Thank you, Deanna. I am the Lord. That's the uppercase L-O-R-D there, Yahweh. I am the beginning and the end. I'm your inhale and exhale. That's what that term Yahweh really, when you say it, that's what you do. Yahweh. It's an inhale and exhale. I'm your everything. It's because I am that. I am the I am. This is why you do that. It's not because it's convenient. It's not because it's handy. It's because God says, I am. So, as an agricultural society that the Jews were, what is God telling them to do? Help the poor by giving them a portion of your crop. There's a lot of people that like to, today, our farmers go right to the edge of the road.
road ditches.
Yeah, we're going all the way to the ditch, right? We're cutting the trees out. We're getting it. We're every inch we can get. All the computerized stuff that automates your sowing and your harvest. It gets you every square inch possible of your land, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's great. It helps with your percentages. It helps with your yield. It's great. In this society back then, the way that people were to support those that were less fortunate, who were poor or were traveling through the area, was to leave food in the field. Today, how do we, as a society, which most of us aren't farmers anymore, how do we as a society, or as Christians specifically, how do we live out this command to make sure we have a plan for giving to those that are travelers or those that are poor? How do we do that today? Is that command still in effect
Through
today?
organizations that are set up for that.
There are.
And just a hint, I found it affected me, it might not be y'all, but the Farm Bill, I don't know that it is this year, but used to, it's about 87% food.
Food stamps.
Yeah.
The
Well,
food
the
stamps
whole
program
thing,
is in the
yes, the
farm
food
bill.
stamps, the
With-
commodities for
yes.
old people. I mean,
Yes.
anything that has to do with food is tied in to the Farm Bill.
Absolutely. So we still, as a nation, participate in the truths that are part of that. Now, how
Well,
do we do
farmers
this?
make food, period, that's just
Period.
the way it is.
Yep.
That's what feeds the world.
So how are those of us that aren't farmers, how do we participate in this truth God gives? We're doing it with what?
Boxes.
The boxes, the food banks. You're giving, you may have at work a way to give to the, I don't know, the Red Cross or other things through, some thing at work, United Way, whatever. But God tells us to make a point of doing this. Now, as a farmer, is this a wise thing to do? If you're just trying to get the most out of your field? No, it's dumb, right?
Well, and I thought about this too. I mean, we could leave full rows of corn all the way around. What are they gonna do with it?
Today, nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing
Feed
today.
their chickens maybe.
Yeah.
Well, there was a flip side of this too, and I was thinking about this last night. They left it in the field, but the poor and the needy, they had to go labor to get the.
That's in the lesson
That's a
too.
totally different concept.
Well, except when you're inner city. When you're inner city, that's not true.
That could be, yeah.
Because they build their own gardens. They
Yes.
build their own.
So there's
And the
a
inner city
a
people
big-
work them that are homeless, that are in shelters, that are in,
culturally different.
so it depends
Today-
on where you are.
Yeah, and we can't reenact this today. There's no way we can take this idea of farming and apply it to people that don't farm and whose crops aren't directly consumed. There's no one in this room that's directly consuming any of the products that are grown around us.
Yeah.
There's about 4 steps between any of the grains that are grown around us to that you're taking. Back then, it was a one-step process. That wheat, that grain, those grapes were coming and being eaten right there on the spot at your house. None of us have that luxury today. There's not a crop grown in Dollar County that is direct to the table. So maybe something else. Most of them get processed a couple times before they get here. So think about that. It's totally different. But in our lives, do we live it out? Do we live out the truth to that? Are we intentional? This was intentional. God was telling his people to be intentional to leave that aside. It's not a good, for a farmer to make money and to survive, goes against what you know. Leaving stuff in the field is bad for business. So this was an intentional giving up in faith that God would use it to bless those that are poor, bless those that are traveling, and in turn, bless the people. Earlier on in the chapter, it talked about Sabbaths. The same truth is with Sabbaths. You can make more money working 7 days a week than you can working 6. So it's a matter of faith. Are you willing to give that up for God? Just like this. So is our faith there where we can give our portion, trusting that God's going to do more with it than we can? Does that make sense? Does that make sense of being compassionate to those? To be intentional about being compassionate instead of just waiting for an opportunity to make that opportunity? These farmers had to be intentional about leaving it. It was their command. Where are we intentional with our compassion? Where are we? Or do we just wait for an opportunity to arise? Think about that. Let's read verses 11, 12. Yeah, we'll just read the 11 through 14. Who would read those 4 verses?
You shall not steal, neither deal falsely, neither lie one to another. And you shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. Thou shalt not curse the deaf, or put a stumbling block before the blind, but shalt fear thy God. I am the Lord.
2 different. We're going to start off in verse 11. It's about stealing. And I think that whole verse talks about stealing. Dealing falsely or lying to one another. Those are all kind of taking things that you don't own. Whether it's a truth that you're kind of taking for yourself, or a thing, or taking advantage of something by telling somebody something that was false. That's all taking something that really ain't yours. Whether it's honor or property or something else. You're taking something that doesn't belong to you. Why are we not supposed to do that?
It's one of the commandments.
Thou shalt not, right? Thou shalt not steal. Why are people's personal property and their reputation and their honor, why are those things important?
That goes back to maybe verse which you had read at the start.
Be holy.
And we want it back up.
I am the Lord your God. I like to think that God gives us things for a reason, whether it's our position, whether it's our home, our possessions. God gives us those to use as we see fit to honor Him. And if you start taking that from somebody, you rob them of their chance to use it for Him. So thieving, lying about something, bearing false witness, is all taking something that God gave somebody for their use to honor Him and trying to use it for yourself. That's taking the honor away from God. Now, God believes in personal property, believe it or not. Or He wouldn't have said, thou shalt not steal.
That's right.
God thinks it's okay for you to own things. There are people that don't believe that. There are people that believe in that socialist, communist thing, that ideal for them, that it's not okay to own your own stuff, that everything should be common. But God gave us one of the top 10 commandments, right? He said, thou shalt not steal. That means it's okay for you to have something. The other ones don't covet. And I shouldn't care. I shouldn't worry about what Mike's got. Man, Mike, I like that truck of yours. I really like that truck of yours. I really want that truck of yours. God gives us the okay to have and warns us against taking it and lusting after it. Doesn't it? So we have to remember these things. These are all how we live out those 10 commandments. God has given Moses the details on how not to covet and how not to steal. Right here. And then the why. Because that doesn't separate you from the people that you're around. That makes you look just like them. You start defrauding people and stealing from people and lying to people, you look like the rest of the world, because that's deep what they're into. That's how they act. You've got to be different. Holy. Separate from them. Now, defrauding your neighbor or robbing him, that's the same thing. Just if you put a gun to his head and took something from him, or lied to somebody so that you could take something of theirs, there's no difference to God. Whether you try to do it under the table and cheat somebody on something, or whether you put a gun to their head to take it, it's all the same. One of them is just more overt than the other. And in verse 13 here, God says they're the same. There's a lot of people that don't mind taking advantage of their neighbor to get something of theirs.
Amen on that.
To get a little more. Whether it's land, property, things, whatever it is. People don't mind stretching that line just a little bit, as long as nobody notices, it's okay. God tells us to be different. Jesus will even say, if someone takes your coat from you, give them your cloak as well. Let them take advantage of you. Don't you be the one that's taking advantage of them. Because you got to be different. You got to be different than the world. For I am holy, says God. You're supposed to be set apart like that too. Don't look like everybody else. Everybody's tired of everybody else, right? Aren't we exhausted with the way the world is? Aren't we tired of being tied up in this mess of people mad at each other and taking advantage of each other and hating each other and just the constant conflict? Aren't we so tired of that? Isn't that so exhausting? And God says, be different. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't go and do these things that they're doing to you just to get even with them. God says, vengeance is mine. I'll take care of it. Let them tear you apart today, but don't let it get to you. Don't stoop to their level. That's what my mom always told me. It was so easy for me to get goaded into a fight when I was younger. It took nothing to get me started.
When you were
He ain't
younger,
lying in baseball dugouts.
If Randy was here this morning, he would recall a time that I punched my best friend in the dugout as hard as I could. It took nothing for me to get started with that. And Mom said, don't let them get to you. Don't let them aggravate you. Don't stoop to that level. God's telling His people the same thing here And Jesus repeats it in the New Testament. Don't go to that level because we're above that. We're better than that. My spirit in you is way better than that. He who is in you is much better than he who is in the world. We're supposed to be different from that. Again, be holy because the Lord is holy. Yahweh is holy. So, verse 14, that is sad. This is sad.
Hold just a moment.
Go ahead, Glenn.
On verse 13, Jesus said they were still practicing that in his day.
Yes.
He gave the parable that the man made the agreement with them, so much for a day's wages.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, he paid the wages.
Yep. Pay them at the end of the day.
They
Why
probably
do they need to
living-
get paid at the end of the day?
They're living hand to mouth, and they might not eat that night if they didn't get their wages.
If they didn't get paid after the work they'd done that day, odds are they were going to be hungry the next day. So our society, again, is a little different than that to some extent. I remember the first month I went to work at Westvaco. Jessica, how long did we have to work to get paid? Was it 2 months or 1?
I don't remember.
It was a long time. I got paid once a month. It's like, getting hungry. Cabinets are empty. It's once a month. It's going to take a
Well,
little
if
bit.
you ever worked at a tobacco crew, you always held them money so they'd come back the next day.
You did, just to make sure they would come back and
That's
not
right,
go spend it on
just to make
something
sure
else.
they'd come back.
Right. So the truth here is that we don't put a stumbling block in somebody's livelihood. That we don't create a hardship for somebody when we owe them something. That's the truth, right? Is that we don't make it difficult on somebody to survive just because it's easier on us. Now, today it doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think it means paying them at the end of the day. But I think it means don't withhold something when it's in your power to do good. Don't hold it and wait. Because you may not have tomorrow. You may not be able to give them tomorrow. Don't owe anybody anything but to love them. That's what we're supposed to do. Don't owe anybody anything. So think of that. Don't be in debt to somebody when it's in your power to make it right. Because you're stealing from it. It's back to that whole idea of taking something that is theirs, that is not yours. So, Glenn, thank you, good point. Now we get to verse 14, and we talk about how we're supposed to deal with folks who have handicaps or disabilities. Don't say something to curse the deaf. Now, that seems absurd, right? To some of us, does that seem absurd?
Yeah,
What
but
do you think that means?
I never thought about that, but it mentions it, that why would you curse somebody that can't hear you? I think the writer in the book said it was coward.
It is cowardly. Say something behind their back, to make sure they can't read lips.
Right.
But what did Jesus say about the same kind of thing? Did Jesus say anything about this? What's the New Testament application of this? Who sinned? Was it him or his father? Isn't that what they asked Jesus? For him to be born this way, whose fault is it? Him or his father? That's talking garbage about that person with a handicap, isn't it? Still New Testament. That's New Testament, right?
Right.
Who's to blame for this person's handicap or their condition? Why? It wasn't me. It wasn't God. It had to be them. So it still happened. In the New Testament, it still happened. They tried to catch Jesus on this idea that it was okay to curse those that were afflicted with something because it reflected something in their lives. Something that they had done to deserve it. And Jesus says, no. Why? Why is this person going through this handicap? But it's to show the mercy and glory of God. How many people have you seen with a handicap or condition that were able to glorify God more than we can through it? The purpose is for them to show God's glory. Man, you look at like Hudson Pace right now, going through this cancer, this terrible situation. It's not our job to say how he got it or why he's got it or what the purpose is, but we're seeing God being glorified through it. Don't talk about people that are going through that. Don't belittle it. Don't look for the opportunity for God to be glorified. It's a beautiful when we see God glorified when things are rough, when things are terrible, when things are hurting people. See God's glory in it. So we don't do that. Don't curse those that are going through it. And don't put a stumbling block before the blind. What a low down, dirty thing to do is to put something in the way of somebody that can't see it. How does that apply today? Don't put a stumbling block before the blind.
You look at, we're talking about physical blindness, or what do we, I mean, you could go off a little bit.
Keep coming, Mike. Keep coming.
You know, when I was reading this, I struggled with it. I went back to don't cast your pearls before pigs.
Mm-hmm.
And this fine line of how do I handle something that's holy and not put this stumbling block. You know, there's people that, in my opinion, are beyond redemption. Okay, that's just the honesty of the thing. That's putting a stumbling block.
Can, absolutely.
I mean, because if I write them off, then they're not going to hear any good news from me.
It's not your job or mine to write them off.
Right.
When God can do anything He wants. And the last thing we want to do is put that stumbling block between that blind person, spiritually blind person,
Right.
and a God who's ready to make him see again. That's how I read that. Now, there are people that are just honoring. Let's just get to that too. There are people that are just honoring and think it's hilarious to watch somebody struggle and fall. And that's kind of the world around us, right? There are so many opportunities that people take just to make a joke, to make somebody laugh, watching people struggle, to do something that catches them off guard. Physical comedy has been around for a long, long time, and people love it. The Three Stooges, the Laurel and Hardy. Just think about how far back, it even goes further than that people would do something just to watch the reaction of it. Are we guilty of that too? Of joining that crowd, laughing at someone's misfortune? Do we find, I think there's a human nature part of it, that human nature finds some joy, sadly, in watching people struggle or have a fall.
Then there's the flip side of this. I almost hate to bring it up, but I have a picture that a friend of mine sent me who was visiting in Paducah. He was driving by the Olive Garden towards the mall, and there was a young lady with a homemade sign that said, "Not gonna lie, need money for weed." Not gonna lie. Gotta appreciate the honesty of the sign. So, but here we are, Christian folk, with your sign on the, you got a dog, you got, just drive by Olive Garden every now and then, and just pray about that, I guess. I don't know.
How are we not to be a stumbling block before that person as well, Mike? That is a...
You figure that out, give me a call.
Yeah, we'll have another meeting, we'll just talk about that one. And
Maybe you could give them a minute.
all right, let's move to our idea of compassion and our attitudes. So I think we're building on something, right? We're continuing to build through these ideas of compassion in our beliefs, compassion in our deeds. Sometimes we can do the right thing with the wrong motives. Let's look at our attitudes behind it. Let's look at the stuff that's hidden. Let's look at the stuff that is in the back of our minds maybe that we don't like to talk about, is the why are we doing it? The attitude behind it. So let's read 15 through 18.
You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. But in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. Neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord.
Go ahead, read 17 and 18.
Okay. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart, nor Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor, and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord.
Thank you. Verse 18 is the golden text illuminated. And we like to quote the second half. Right? Love thy neighbor as thyself. Oh, that's beautiful. What does it say before it in that same sentence? Thou shalt not avenge nor... Okay, avenging is okay. All right, I don't have the sword. I'm not going to avenge. Fine, God, but I'm still not going to like it. What does it say? Don't bear a grudge against the children of thy people. That's how we love thy neighbor as thyself. So, how do we love our neighbor? Well, we don't do unrighteousness in judgment. Just because somebody's poor, we don't give them extra credit for being good, nor do we give someone who's rich, who has money, extra credit because they're rich. We treat everyone fairly. We treat everyone righteously. In righteousness, you'll judge your neighbor. Whether they have all the money in the world or whether they don't have a dime to their name, we treat them the same. They're equal. Everyone at the foot of the cross is on level ground, right? Doesn't matter how much or how little you have physically, we're to treat everyone the same, equitably. Maybe not equally, but equitably, fairly. We don't take advantage of someone for their position, and we don't hurt somebody because they can't defend themselves. Does that make sense? Is that clear how we're supposed to act? We're not supposed to buddy up to the rich guy because we might get something from him, nor are we to say, oh, just because they're poor, they're perfect, and we can't tell them anything that they're doing right or wrong. We're going to get to that in just a second. So we have to be, God says righteous, and it's not our righteousness, it's His righteousness. There is no difference between a poor person and a rich person in God's eyes. Although Jesus says, what about rich people? Harder for them to get into heaven than it is for a camel to go through an eye of a needle. Maybe we ought to have a little more compassion. Maybe we ought to be praying for them because, man, they take all their stuff and they think that's what's getting them into heaven.
Well, and we need to realize compared to most people in third world countries, we're as rich as you get. So
We are in the top 1%. Yeah.
Relative is rich.
Yep. So, don't take advantage of that on either side. Honor God by honoring people as the same. Don't bring somebody up to the front of your meeting and acknowledge them just because they're rich. Don't make somebody sit in the back because they're poor, and vice versa. Everybody is level at the foot of the cross. Verse 16. Let's talk about that for a second. I like the phrase, go up and down. Let's have an interactive moment. Hey, Kim, did you hear about? Did you hear about? You want to know something about Cheryl? I got to tell you about Cheryl this morning. John, hey, Cheryl, did you hear about Terry? I'm going up and down, right? I'm going to tell you about Terry. Terry. The idea that someone's putting their time and effort into spreading tales. Boy, what does God say about that? It's pretty simple. Stop. Don't do it. Why is that in the human nature to do it? Why do we do that? Why is there something inside of us, in the flesh, that wants to do that? There's something in here that likes to be the teller of something. To have that information and to be able to share it. Whether it's true or not, there's something on the inside of us that we have to fight. Why? Why does God not like that?
Mostly to make yourself look better in the room.
There you go. Because it's to make yourself look better. Yes. You be the center of attention. Sometimes we like to be the center of attention, don't we?
I could give you a whole long list of people that do this,
Oh,
but I guess that would make me a terrible.
yeah, you know, if you got that list printed out, man, we'll just take copies of it. I mean, okay, social media makes this terrible, doesn't it?
I think it made it more obvious.
It does. It makes it
I
easier and
remember
more.
my grandmother being on the landline phone, talking to her friend for, and I'm not saying they were gossiping the whole time, but, it was just like Terry said, social media just made it more obvious. I think people have done that for.
Well, they have, or this wouldn't be in it.
Exactly.
From the very beginning, right? It's inherent in that fallen nature to want to take the place of God. Because we're judging. We're thinking we're the expert. We think we have the knowledge and know all. We don't. God is the only one that does. And when we like to put ourselves in God's spot by saying, well, I know this about that. It's not our position to do that, is it? Sometimes we're guilty of this and not even know it. It just happens so quickly. You could be sitting at a table with folks and then all of a sudden somebody's talking about, well, did you hear about what? And it'd be a half-truth that that person thinks they know it all, and then all of a sudden it gets spread around.
Well, further back in the lesson, it's the toothpaste out of the tube,
Yeah.
because they said how to fix it.
Yeah.
And once it's out there, there is no fixing.
So in the illustrating the lesson section, hey, I said something I didn't know and it was wrong, and I told these two people about it, and now it's all out. How can I fix it? Well, Dad tells the girl to go take a feather pillow, cut it open, and take a feather and shake it out at the door of everyone's house that you went to and told. And then the next couple days, go around and gather all those feathers up. I can't, because they've spread out, the wind took them. Exactly. It's the same thing that happens when we do that. You can't capture that back. The half-truth or the partial truth, or even the outright wrong statement that you said, you can't bring those back in. And God says, in addition to that, and this is kind of, He puts them in the same verse, in the same sentence, neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. What? The blood of your neighbor? What does that mean? What's he trying to say there? How are we supposed to, what's he talking about there? What's the blood of the neighbor have to do with anything?
I think I read in here where it was, if you knew something wasn't true about your neighbor, they were accused of something, found guilty, and you knew different, you were standing against the life of your neighbor.
Absolutely. So you start spreading a rumor, and that's why these are tied together. You start spreading something about your neighbor that's not true, or is even half true, or even if it was true, and it caused something of harm to come on them, whose responsibility is it? That becomes yours. His blood is on your hands. If you're in that circle that's stirring that up by saying things and passing that judgment around with your tone and with your words, the pain that he's going through is because you did it. His blood is on your hands.
That's like the time that I had given, that I felt so urged to give my testimony in a church. And I just kept thinking, this is what God wants me to do. This is what He wants me to do. He wants me to tell this story. And when I did, then everybody started talking. And we were kind of shunned in the church. And then it made me want to shut down and not tell nobody else the same story, because it hurt me bad to see the people that I love treat me different because it was a testimony that I need to give.
How often does that thought and that condition prevent people from feeling free enough to give their testimony? Because they're afraid someone's going to take that story and spread it in a way that's hurtful, negative, painful, causing pain rather than allowing people to see the redemption that comes from sharing your testimony. That's why people hesitate. That reason, the lack of trust in each other, or the trust maybe in that people will take it and run with it and do damage with it. That's one thing we definitely have to work on. That's what we have to do. So there is a physical reason why we don't tell those tales, is because that becomes could be a physical pain to the person that you're targeting. It could become a very dangerous thing that the person is going to have to deal with. So, we're going to have to stop there. We'll get into the rest of the lesson tonight, 33 through 37. And I encourage you to look at the rest of chapter 19. There's a lot of really good stuff that goes along with obedience in the rest of chapter 19. But these verses focus on how we deal with each other. So please spend some time, if you have the opportunity, in chapter 19. We'll finish this part of the lesson tonight. And then I really love the Golden Text Eliminated. I thought that was a great section. If you haven't read that yet, please study that, and we'll use that tonight as well. Any questions before we leave? Any thoughts? I have to remember I've got 2 mics in the room when I ask Mike to pray. I got to make sure I identify which mic, Mike G, Mike H.
I forgot about that.
That's all right. No, it's good. Glenn Dunn. I'll use the last name there when you close us out of our Sunday school time.
Yes. Father, thank you for your word today. Thank you for all of the illustrations and the thoughts we had about it. I pray, God, that the things that pricked us in the heart, that you'll give us grace and power, strength, Lord, to implement them in our lives. And that you be glorified in the implementation of them, Father. I pray, God, that you'll lead us as a church to know how to treat each other better, how to reach out to other people, Father. I pray, God, that you'll be with us this morning in our worship service as we worship and exalt your name, and that we might be different because of it. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. As we are reminded, there are snacks in the back and time for some fellowship.
Yeah.